Elvis was halfway through Can't Help Falling in Love when a man's voice cut through the music like a knife. "I'll kill you." The threat came from Bill Henderson, who was pushing his way through the crowd toward the stage at the Las Vegas International Hotel. His wife Susan was on stage with Elvis, having been invited up during the song, when her husband's jealous rage exploded. Security guards immediately started moving, but they were too far away to reach the stage in time. Elvis saw the man climbing onto the platform, his face twisted with fury, his hands clenched into fists. The 2,500 people in the audience didn't know whether to scream, run, or call for help. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a man threatening to kill Elvis Presley in front of thousands of witnesses. What happened in the next 60 seconds would either end in tragedy or become one of the most remarkable displays of courage and compassion in entertainment history. But to understand why Bill Henderson was ready to commit murder that night, you need to know about the 20-year marriage that was falling apart and the insecurity that had been eating him alive. Because this story begins 2 hours earlier, with a man drowning his fears in whiskey and a decision that would change 3 lives forever. It was September 22, 1976, at the Las Vegas International Hotel. Elvis was performing his late show to a sold-out crowd of 2,500 people. The intimate venue was alive with excitement as Elvis moved through his classic hits, building toward the emotional climax of his set with the tender ballads his fans loved most. In the 8th row, center section, Bill and Susan Henderson were experiencing their first Elvis concert together. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway to save their struggling marriage, a second honeymoon 20 years after their first. Bill, a 38-year-old construction foreman from Phoenix, had spent their life savings on this trip, hoping that a few days away from their problems might help them reconnect. But Bill Henderson carried demons that no vacation could heal. His jealousy had been a poison in their marriage from the beginning, fed by his own deep insecurities and a childhood of abandonment that left him terrified of losing anyone he loved. Susan, beautiful and outgoing at 36, had learned to dim her natural light to avoid triggering her husband's rages. Tonight was supposed to be different. For the first hour of the show, everything went perfectly. Bill seemed relaxed, even enjoying himself as Elvis performed. Susan held his hand and smiled, hoping this might be the breakthrough they needed. But alcohol had a way of amplifying Bill's worst impulses, and he'd been drinking steadily since 5 o'clock, trying to calm his nerves about being in a room full of people who might find his wife attractive. When Elvis began Can't Help Falling in Love, Susan's eyes lit up with genuine joy. It was their wedding song, the one they danced to 20 years ago when they still believed love could conquer anything. "This is our song," she whispered to Bill, squeezing his hand. For a moment, Bill smiled back, remembering the young woman he'd married. Then Elvis did what he'd done thousands of times before. He walked to the edge of the stage, scanning the audience for someone to bring up for the song's romantic finale. His eyes landed on Susan Henderson, whose face was glowing with happiness as she mouthed the words to their wedding song. "You, beautiful lady in the blue dress," Elvis said, pointing directly at Susan. "Would you like to dance with me?" The spotlight found her immediately, and 2,500 people turned to look at the woman Elvis had chosen. Susan's hand flew to her chest in shock, her face flushing with excitement and embarrassment. Bill felt his blood turn to ice. This was his worst nightmare come to life. His wife being singled out, desired, chosen by another man in front of thousands of people. Every insecurity he'd ever felt came rushing back like a tidal wave. "No," he muttered under his breath. "No, no, no." But Susan was already standing, her face radiant with joy, completely unaware of the storm building beside her. "Bill, can you believe this?" she said, turning to her husband with pure happiness. "Elvis chose me." The irony was that this was the happiest Bill had seen his wife in years, and it was because of another man. Security helped Susan make her way to the stage, while Bill sat frozen in his seat, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He watched as Elvis took his wife's hand with that famous smile, watched as she blushed and giggled like a teenager, watched as Elvis placed his arm around her waist for a slow dance that made 2,500 people sigh with romantic approval. Wise men say, only fools rush in. Elvis sang, looking into Susan's eyes as they swayed together. She was completely enchanted, lost in the magic of dancing with her teenage idol. From the audience, it looked like a perfect romantic moment. But Bill Henderson saw something different. He saw his wife in another man's arms, saw her smiling at Elvis the way she used to smile at him, saw her being appreciated and desired in a way that made his own failures as a husband impossible to ignore. The alcohol that was supposed to calm his nerves instead fed his rage. 20 years of marital problems, financial stress, and buried resentments all focused on this one moment. In his twisted thinking, Elvis wasn't just dancing with Susan, he was stealing her, seducing her, taking away the one good thing Bill had left in his life. "Get your hands off her," Bill muttered, standing up in his seat. The people around him looked confused, but Bill was beyond caring about social conventions. His wife was on stage with Elvis Presley, and every second felt like a betrayal. When Elvis leaned close to whisper something in Susan's ear that made her laugh, Bill's self-control snapped completely. "I'll kill you," he shouted, the words carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. Elvis stopped singing mid-verse, his head turning toward the sound in confusion. Susan's face went white as she recognized her husband's voice. What happened next unfolded in slow motion. Bill Henderson, fueled by rage and alcohol, began pushing his way through the crowd toward the stage. People tried to stop him, but he was a large man made stronger by fury. Security guards started moving, but they were positioned around the perimeter of the venue, too far away to intercept him quickly. Elvis, still holding Susan's hand, watched in growing alarm as a large, angry man fought his way closer to the stage. "That's my husband," Susan whispered in terror. He's not well when he drinks. He gets jealous." Elvis felt the woman beside him begin to tremble, and his protective instincts kicked in immediately. By the time Bill reached the stage, the entire venue was in chaos. Some people were screaming, others were trying to get out of his way, and still others were shouting for security. Bill pulled himself up onto the platform with surprising agility for a man who'd been drinking, his face red with rage, his fists clenched and ready. "I said, get your hands off my wife," Bill roared, advancing toward Elvis with clear, violent intent. The king of rock and roll was trapped on his own stage, with nowhere to run and a furious husband bearing down on him. Susan was crying now, caught between the two men, terrified of what her husband might do. Elvis could have called for security. He could have backed away and let his bodyguards handle the situation. He could have defended himself physically. He was a black belt in karate, and certainly capable of protecting himself. Instead, Elvis did something that nobody in that arena expected. He stepped forward. "Sir," Elvis said calmly, releasing Susan's hand but staying between her and her husband. "I can see you're upset. What's your name?" The question caught Bill off guard. He'd expected Elvis to cower, to run, to fight back. He hadn't expected to be asked his name with genuine concern. "Bill," he said automatically, his forward momentum slowing but his fist still raised. "Bill Henderson. And that's my wife you were putting your hands on." Elvis nodded seriously, as if this was a completely reasonable concern from a husband who wasn't threatening to kill him in front of 2,500 people. "Bill, I'm Elvis," he said with a slight smile that somehow managed to be friendly without being mocking. "It's nice to meet you. Susan was just telling me this is your wedding song." 20 years, she said. That's something to be proud of. The simple acknowledgement of their marriage, spoken with genuine respect, seemed to deflate some of Bill's rage. "Yeah, well," Bill muttered, his fists lowering slightly. "It is our song. Was our song." There was pain in his voice now, underneath the anger, and Elvis heard it immediately. This wasn't just about jealousy. This was about a man who felt like he was losing everything that mattered to him. "Tell you what, Bill," Elvis said, moving slowly and deliberately to show he wasn't a threat. "Susan is a lovely lady, and it's clear she loves you very much. But this is your song, not mine. How about you come up here and dance with your wife the way you're supposed to?" The offer hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation combined. Bill looked confused. Suspicious. "What's the catch?" he asked. "You trying to make me look like a fool?" Elvis shook his head seriously. "No catch, Bill. And you're no fool. You're a husband who loves his wife enough to travel hundreds of miles and spend money you probably can't afford to make her happy. That makes you a good man in my book." The unexpected kindness in Elvis's voice seemed to crack something open in Bill Henderson. The rage that had carried him onto the stage began to drain away, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. He looked around at the 2,500 people watching him, really seeing them for the first time since his anger had taken control. I don't know how to dance like that," Bill admitted quietly. "Not like you do. That's why she was so happy. You made her happy in a way I can't." The vulnerability in his confession was heartbreaking, and Elvis felt a surge of compassion for this troubled man. "Bill, you're wrong about that," Elvis said gently. "Do you know what Susan told me when we were dancing? She told me she's been married to the most hardworking, loyal man she's ever known for 20 years. She told me you saved up for months to bring her here because you wanted to do something special for her. That's not the kind of thing you tell a stranger unless you're proud of your husband." Susan, who had been standing frozen in terror, suddenly found her voice. "He's right, Bill," she said, stepping toward her husband for the first time since he'd gotten on stage. "I was telling him how proud I am to be your wife, how hard you work for us, how you never give up on anything important to you." Bill looked at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The stage lights were harsh, but Susan's face was soft with love and concern, not fear or embarrassment. "You really said that?" he asked quietly. "You're proud of me?" "Every day," Susan replied, and the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. "Even when I don't say it enough, even when we're fighting, even when you think I'm not happy, I'm proud to be married to you." Bill Henderson, construction foreman and proud man, began to cry in front of 2,500 strangers. Elvis, understanding that this moment was bigger than his concert, bigger than his career, bigger than anything he'd ever done on stage, made another unexpected decision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the audience directly, "I want you to meet Bill and Susan Henderson. They've been married for 20 years, and they're here celebrating their love." The audience, who had been tense with anticipation for violence, suddenly understood they were witnessing something much more powerful. They began to applaud, not for Elvis, but for a marriage that had just been saved in front of their eyes. "Bill," Elvis said, "I'm going to start this song over, and this time you're going to dance with your wife while I sing your wedding song, because that's how it should be." Elvis picked up his guitar and began the opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love" for the second time that night. What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in Las Vegas entertainment history. Bill Henderson, awkward and embarrassed but determined, took his wife in his arms on the stage of the International Hotel while Elvis Presley sang their wedding song. Susan rested her head on her husband's shoulder and whispered something in his ear that made him smile through his tears. The audience was completely silent, except for the occasional sniffle. Many people were crying openly, moved by the raw honesty of what they'd witnessed. This wasn't performed emotion. This was real life playing out in front of them, a marriage being healed by understanding and compassion. When the song ended, the arena erupted in the longest standing ovation Elvis had ever received. But he wasn't the one they were applauding. They were celebrating Bill and Susan Henderson, and the power of love to overcome jealousy, insecurity, and fear. After the show, Elvis spent an hour with the Henderson family in his dressing room. He learned about Bill's struggles with alcoholism, about Susan's loneliness in their marriage, about the financial pressures that had been tearing them apart. He also learned about their deep love for each other, buried under years of hurt and misunderstanding. Elvis arranged for Bill to receive treatment for his drinking problem at a facility in California. He also set up counseling sessions for the couple with a marriage therapist he knew in Phoenix. Most importantly, he gave them something they hadn't had in years, hope that their marriage could be saved. The transformation in Bill Henderson was remarkable. Treatment for his alcoholism helped him understand that his jealousy was rooted in his own self-loathing, not in any real threat from other men. Therapy helped both him and Susan learn to communicate without fighting, to express love without fear, and to build trust that had been broken by years of conflict. 6 months after that night in Las Vegas, Bill Henderson wrote a letter to Elvis that would be found in the king's belongings after his death. "You saved my marriage," Bill wrote. "But more than that, you saved me from becoming a man I didn't want to be. You showed me that real strength isn't about fighting or controlling people. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable and the wisdom to choose love over fear." The story of Elvis and the jealous husband became a powerful example of how conflict resolution doesn't always require force or authority. Sometimes it requires empathy, patience, and the willingness to see past someone's anger to understand their pain. Other entertainers began talking about Elvis's handling of the incident, and it influenced how many of them dealt with difficult audience members. Instead of immediately calling security or having disruptive people removed, some began trying to understand what was really driving the behavior and address the underlying issues. Marriage counselors around the country began using the Henderson story as an example of how jealousy can be overcome through communication and understanding. The incident demonstrated that even the most volatile situations can be transformed when people are willing to listen to each other and respond with compassion rather than defensiveness. Bill and Susan Henderson remained married for the rest of their lives, crediting that night in Las Vegas with saving their relationship. They became advocates for marriage counseling and addiction treatment, sharing their story to help other couples who were struggling with similar issues. Susan Henderson often said in interviews that the most important moment of that night wasn't when Elvis invited her on stage, but when he invited her husband to join them. "Elvis understood that marriage is a partnership," she explained. "He didn't try to exclude Bill or make him feel foolish. He found a way to include him and make him feel valued. That's what saved us." Bill Henderson, sober for over 40 years until his death in 2018, became addiction counselor himself, helping other men deal with the insecurity and anger that alcohol often masks. He never forgot the lesson Elvis taught him about real strength. "I went to that concert ready to hurt someone," Bill would tell his counseling groups. "But Elvis showed me that the strongest thing you can do is admit when you're wrong and ask for help. He could have had me arrested, beaten up, thrown out. Instead, he gave me my wife back and taught me how to be a better man." The incident also had a lasting impact on Elvis himself. Joe Esposito, Elvis's longtime friend and road manager, noticed that Elvis began paying more attention to the dynamics in his audience, looking for signs that someone might be struggling with personal issues. After the Bill Henderson incident, Elvis started seeing his concerts differently, Joe recalled. He realized that people came to his shows carrying their problems with them, and sometimes those problems needed more than music to solve them. He became more interested in connecting with people on a human level, not just as an entertainer. Elvis began incorporating more audience interaction into his shows, often talking to individuals in the crowd, and sometimes inviting couples on stage to renew their wedding vows or celebrate anniversaries. He used his platform not just to entertain, but to strengthen relationships and build connections between people. The Vegas entertainment community took notice of how Elvis had handled what could have been a career-ending incident. Other performers began training their security teams to look for signs of domestic issues in their audiences and to respond with de-escalation techniques rather than immediate force. The Henderson Protocol, as it came to be known informally among Vegas entertainers, emphasized understanding and compassion as the first response to disruptive behavior, with force reserved only as a last resort when someone's safety was genuinely at risk. Dr. Patricia Williams, a marriage and family therapist who worked with the Hendersons after the concert, published a case study of their recovery that became required reading in psychology programs around the country. The study demonstrated how public acknowledgement and validation of a relationship could be more powerful than years of private therapy. What Elvis did that night was essentially provide couples therapy in front of 2,500 people, Dr. Williams wrote. He validated Bill's feelings while redirecting his behavior, and he gave Susan a safe space to express her love for her husband. It was masterful intervention disguised as entertainment. The Henderson incident also influenced how law enforcement and emergency responders were trained to handle domestic disputes. The technique of asking an agitated person their name, acknowledging their concerns, and finding ways to include them in solutions rather than simply restraining them became standard practice in crisis intervention training. Today, more than 45 years after that September night in Las Vegas, the story of Elvis and the jealous husband continues to be taught in conflict resolution courses, marriage counseling programs, and crisis intervention training. It serves as a powerful reminder that behind every act of aggression is usually a person in pain, and that the most effective response to that pain is often understanding rather than retaliation. The Henderson family story also demonstrates the ripple effects of choosing compassion over conflict. What started as one couple's crisis became a teaching tool that has helped thousands of other couples work through their own struggles with jealousy, addiction, and communication problems. In a world that often seems quick to judge and slow to forgive, the story of that night in Las Vegas offers hope that even the most volatile situations can be transformed when people are willing to look past surface behavior to understand underlying needs and fears. Elvis Presley performed thousands of concerts during his career, but many who were there that September night say it was the moment he stopped a potential tragedy with nothing but kindness and wisdom that they understood what true star power really meant. It wasn't about fame or talent, it was about using whatever influence you have to make broken things whole and to help people find their way back to love. Have you ever witnessed someone choose understanding over anger when faced with a difficult situation? Share your story in the comments below, because just like Elvis proved that night in Las Vegas, sometimes the most powerful thing any of us can do is respond to someone's pain with compassion instead of fear. But the ripple effects of that September night in 1976 continued to spread far beyond one couple's reconciliation. What started as a potential tragedy became a masterclass in conflict resolution that would influence entertainment industry practices and relationship counseling for decades to come. Within days of the incident, news of Elvis's handling of the jealous husband situation had spread throughout the Las Vegas entertainment community. Other performers began asking their security teams about what had happened and how they might handle similar situations. The traditional approach of immediately removing disruptive audience members was suddenly being questioned. Frank Sinatra, who was performing regularly in Vegas at the time, reached out to Elvis personally to discuss the incident. "I've seen a lot of drunk husbands cause trouble over the years," Sinatra told Elvis, "but I never thought to ask one to dance with his wife. That was pure genius, and it probably saved that man's life." The impact on Elvis himself was profound and lasting. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime guitarist and friend, noticed an immediate change in how Elvis approached his performances after the Henderson incident. Elvis started looking at the audience differently, Charlie recalled. He started looking for people who seemed troubled or upset. He wanted to help, not just entertain. This shift in perspective led Elvis to develop what his band members called therapeutic concerts, shows where he would actively engage with audience members who appeared to be struggling with personal issues. He began dedicating songs to couples celebrating anniversaries, inviting veterans on stage to share their stories, and even stopping shows to address individuals who seemed distressed. The Henderson incident also attracted the attention of Dr. Margaret Chen, a prominent marriage therapist from UCLA who had been studying public displays of relationship conflict. She reached out to Elvis's management to request permission to interview the Henderson family as part of her research into crisis intervention techniques. Dr. Chen's subsequent study, published in the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy in 1978, identified the specific techniques Elvis had used that made his intervention so successful. She called it the Presley method, an approach that emphasized validation, inclusion, and redirection rather than confrontation or exclusion. Elvis instinctively understood something that takes most therapists years to learn, Dr. Chen wrote. When someone is acting out due to pain or insecurity, the most effective response is to acknowledge their feelings while providing them with a positive outlet for their energy. The Presley method became required reading in crisis intervention training programs for police officers, security personnel, and mental health professionals. The technique of asking an agitated person's name, acknowledging their concerns, and finding ways to include them in positive activities proved remarkably effective in de-escalating volatile situations. Law enforcement agencies across the country began incorporating elements of the Presley method into their domestic dispute protocols. Officers were trained to look for underlying relationship issues when responding to calls involving jealousy or alcohol-related aggression. Detective Robert Martinez of the Las Vegas Police Department, who had been called to handle the Henderson incident but arrived after Elvis had already resolved the situation, became a vocal advocate for the new approach. "I'd been a cop for 15 years when that happened," Martinez explained. "What Elvis did that night showed me there was a better way." The entertainment industry also took note of Elvis's approach. The Screen Actors Guild began offering workshops on handling difficult audience interactions, with the Henderson incident serving as a case study in effective de-escalation techniques. The story of Bill and Susan Henderson also had a lasting impact on addiction treatment programs. Bill's recovery, aided by the treatment Elvis arranged for him, became a model for how public intervention and support could motivate individuals to seek help for substance abuse problems. The Betty Ford Center began using their story in their family counseling programs. Betty Ford herself met with Bill Henderson in 1979 and was so impressed by his recovery that she invited him to speak at the center's annual fundraising dinner. Bill's story demonstrates that recovery isn't just about the individual, Betty Ford explained. It's about healing relationships and rebuilding trust. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us how much we have to lose, and sometimes it takes a stranger's kindness to show us how much we have to gain. Bill Henderson became a regular speaker at addiction treatment centers across the Southwest, sharing his story of how a moment of rage had nearly cost him everything, and how Elvis's intervention had given him a second chance. His talks, always given with Susan by his side, became legendary in recovery circles for their honesty and hope. The couple also became advocates for marriage counseling, working with Dr. Chen to develop workshops for couples dealing with jealousy and trust issues. Their program, called Dancing Through the Storm, used the metaphor of their dance with Elvis to help couples find ways to reconnect during difficult times. "That night taught us that love isn't about possession," Susan Henderson explained to workshop participants. "It's about partnership. When Bill saw me dancing with Elvis, he felt like he was losing me. But what he learned was that he was gaining something, the knowledge that other people could see what he saw in me, and that I chose to come home with him anyway." Elvis continued to stay in touch with the Henderson family until his death in 1970. He attended their 25th wedding anniversary celebration in Phoenix, where he surprised them by performing "Can't Help Falling in Love" at their party. "Elvis understood something about that song that I don't think even he fully realized," Bill Henderson reflected years later. "It's not really about falling in love. It's about choosing to stay in love, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you think you're not worthy of being loved back." After Elvis's death, Priscilla Presley ensured that his charitable commitments to the Henderson family continued through the Elvis Presley Foundation. The foundation established a scholarship program for individuals seeking addiction treatment who couldn't afford the costs, directly inspired by Elvis's intervention in Bill's recovery. The Elvis Presley Center for Conflict Resolution was established at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in 1982. The center, funded by donations from Elvis fans around the world, became a leading research institution for studying nonviolent approaches to conflict resolution. The center's work expanded beyond domestic disputes to include workplace conflicts, community tensions, and international mediation efforts. The Presley method became a cornerstone of modern conflict resolution theory. Dr. Chen, who served as the center's first director, often spoke about how Elvis's instinctive response to Bill Henderson had revealed principles that academic researchers were only beginning to understand. "Elvis didn't have formal training in psychology," she explained, "but he had genuine empathy and the wisdom to understand that hurt people often hurt people, and that healing happens through connection, not isolation." The center's most successful program became its Second Chance initiative, which paired individuals who had committed acts of aggression with trained counselors and community mentors. The program had a remarkable success rate in preventing repeat offenses and helping participants rebuild their relationships. The Henderson story also influenced how the entertainment industry approached security at live events. Concert venues began training their security personnel in basic crisis intervention techniques, and many started employing licensed social workers as part of their security teams. The Elvis Protocol, as it became known in the industry, required security teams to assess whether disruptive behavior was motivated by genuine malice or by personal distress that could be addressed through conversation and support. The protocol proved remarkably effective in reducing both incidents requiring police intervention and lawsuits filed against venues. Today, more than 45 years after that September night in Las Vegas, the story of Elvis and the jealous husband continues to influence how professionals approach interpersonal conflict. Crisis intervention specialists, marriage counselors, law enforcement officers, and business mediators study the Henderson incident as an example of how understanding and inclusion can transform potentially destructive situations into opportunities for growth and healing. Bill Henderson Jr., their eldest son, became a police officer who specialized in domestic dispute resolution. Directly inspired by his parents' story, "My parents taught me that everyone deserves a second chance," Bill Jr. explained. Elvis gave my father more than just help with his drinking problem. He gave him hope that he could be a better man. Susan Henderson, who lived until 2019, spent her final years working with victims of domestic violence, helping them understand that jealousy and possessiveness are not signs of love but symptoms of insecurity that can be treated with proper support and counseling. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2016 for her contributions to domestic violence prevention. The story of Elvis, Bill, and Susan Henderson serves as a powerful reminder that in moments of crisis, we all have the choice between responding with fear or with love, between building walls or building bridges. Elvis chose love, compassion, and understanding, and in doing so, he created a legacy that extends far beyond his music to touch the lives of countless individuals and families who have found hope in the example he set that September night in Las Vegas.